Good morning, my favorite carboholics. I know you guys are interested and anxious to get started with some sourdough bread, and that's what we're going to do today. I'm using in this recipe a little diastatic malt powder. That's completely optional, and we'll talk more about that later. Just give it a little color, maybe feed the yeast a little better. But enjoy. Okay, so this has been a long time coming, so let's get to it. 5 cups or 602 grams of bread flour. I use King Arthur bread flour. Then 2 teaspoons of diastatic malt powder. Mix that in well, create a little well in there for yourself. And then we're going to add 1 3/4 cups or 397 grams of lukewarm water. And we're going to mix that until there's no more loose flour. I haven't forgotten about our starter, I haven't forgotten about our salt, but we're working towards an autolyse here. And I'll explain that as we get to it. So mix with my little Dutch whisk, and then eventually that's going to break or, give in. So you got to put your hands in. And this is a great way to tell whether or not you've got all of the flour and water incorporated well together. So you're not trying to create any gluten here. You're just trying to make sure there's no loose flour left on anything. Just making sure it's hydrated. And it's almost ready. So what are you going to do? Cover it and let it autolyse for 45 minutes. And that's where you allow the flour to absorb as much water as it can. It'll make your dough easier to knead. It'll make the whole job easier for you. Now the fun part. We're going to add 1 cup or 227 grams of a fed mature sourdough starter that has passed the float test. You don't remember what the float test is? Here's the float test. Take a tablespoon or a teaspoon of your starter and wet your finger so that it doesn't stick to your finger, and slide it into a jar of room temperature water. If it floats like this, it's got enough CO2 to leaven your bread. From time to time, you'll see it float and then sink. I like to give it an extra hour or so. So now that you know you've got a strong starter, add your starter to your recipe, 1 cup or 227 grams. And then we're going to add 18 grams or 1 tablespoon of salt. I use flaky sea salt. And then I take my fingers and I punch little holes in it to help the salt get incorporated, help the salt with mixing with the starter and moving all of that stuff around. Here you can do a little kneading, just stretch and folds basically, until you get to the point where all of the starter has been incorporated, no more mess on the side of the bowl, and you have got something that resembles a smooth dough ball. So subsequent to this, we're going to be doing some resting. So for right now, we're going to rest this for 45 minutes, and that's the autolyse that we're going to do. 45 minutes. When that 45 minutes is up, we're going to uncover it and perform our first stretch and fold. Dampen your hands, sticky dough, wet hands, and stretch from all corners of the compass. Only until the dough begins to resist you. You don't want to break the dough at this point. You just want to create a little resistance and stretch it as far as you can. Then flip it upside down in the bowl and cover it up again. This is just a rest period for 30 minutes. So you've done a 45-minute rest, stretch and fold. You just completed a 30-minute rest. We're going to stretch and fold again. The dough will feel amazingly different every single time you put your hands in it. So it doesn't make sense for me to show you all 4 of these stretch and folds because they're exactly the same thing. So right after your final stretch and fold, you're going to do 4. You're going to cover it up, and we're going into the refrigerator overnight for 12 hours. So night, young bread. Then first thing in the morning, we're going to pull it out. Sit it on the counter and let it begin to come to room temperature. Now, if you're like me and you didn't spray your non-stick, your saran wrap like I did, then you're going to do this. You're going to peel it away. You don't want to pull it away because if you do, you'll tear your dough. And we don't want to tear our dough. We just want to pull it away. Then we're going to put down just enough flour to just so that it doesn't stick. And I like to run some around the inside of the bowl so that when I open it up with the bowl scraper, I'm trying not to deflate this flour. I'm going around with the bowl scraper and some flour falls down, making this process a lot easier. You want it to come out of the container naturally, particularly if you sprayed it properly initially. You want it to come out of the container naturally. This aspect of the bake is called dividing. We know now how many we want to get out of this, so we divide it. Here I eyeballed it. Better way to do it is with a scale. Measure the whole thing and then cut it in half. You have two exact same size pieces. So I'm going to use a method here that was invented by Tartine Bakery. And so you make it a little like an envelope. Fold the top down and tuck just like you're tucking an infant. I'll show you that one more time. So on the bottom, this is a pre-shape now. This is not a final shaping. So we make it a little bigger on the bottom, fold it in up 2/3, fold it over onto itself, and then from the top down, and then stretch and tuck it together. Then roll until you have a semi-ball. Now this is where I try and get the dough to understand what it is I want it to be and for it to begin to conform to that. It's a little communication thing we do. So now we're ready for our final shaping. I'm going to put a little flour on the top because on the outside it's not going to matter. I'm not getting any flour into the bread. And here we're going to just pull the edges, form it into a circle, creating some tension on the outside, and then rolling the dough and pulling it towards you to create tension along the surface. Now, for this recipe, I'm going to do something a little different because I was experimenting. But here's how I'd like you to do it. Once you get to this point and you're ready to put your dough in the bannetons, you're going to put your seam side up. I put the seam side down here because I was experimenting with having it bloom naturally with just a few cuts in it. And we'll see what that looks like here in a minute. But typically, all seams are up. So these are now going to rest and go into the oven after they're proofed. Are you ready to see what they look like? Let's see what they look like. Boom! That is a natural blooming of a loaf of bread. That's nice. All that color, some caramelization, the design from the banneton. A member of ours had some very successful bakes, and she shared her pictures with us. So if you'd like to bake with us, join Henry's Bread Kitchen and Baking Great Bread at Home every Saturday morning from 11 to 12, and we'll get you on the journey.